Hello, welcome to our video chat for 2024, first one in January, Donkeys and Dragons. We'll spend about 15 minutes chatting about a specific topic. Today, we're talking with Trisha Gee, a software engineer, Java champion, and author. Trisha has developed a wide range of Java applications and is currently developer advocate at Gradle. She's experienced with Java high-performance systems, contributes to open source projects. We like that she says she's especially passionate about sharing things that help developers. She's contributed to several books, including Head First, Java, 97 Things that Every Developer Should Know, and What to Look For in a Code Review. So we share something in common because I have a little chapter in 97 Things Every Developer Should Know as well. So, I'm Janet Gregory.
And I'm Lisa Crispin.
So, hello and welcome, Trisha. Today, we'd like to explore some of the types of developers, those ones that don't like to write tests. We've often heard the argument, writing tests slow me down. So we're curious how to work with developers that have that attitude. So have you encountered a lot of developers who feel testing will actually slow them down, or maybe have other reasons to avoid writing tests? And any ideas where those ideas come from and why they feel that way?
Yes, all of that. Yeah, I do come across a bunch of developers who feel that writing tests slow them down. I think one of the things that's important to understand, so especially for people who like writing tests, and I'm one of them now, it's important to understand that developers who say they find tests slow them down are not like being like difficult or awkward or not listening to what we have to say about tests. It depends a lot on the environment that they're working in. So there are some systems which are difficult to write automated tests for example. I mean, you've seen them, right? The code already exists. People haven't written automated tests. It becomes very difficult to write tests for those kinds of systems because you have to set up a bunch of mocks and stubs, and it's difficult to poke data in. So there are some places where I worked somewhere where when I started, there was 0% test coverage. And when I left, after about a year and a half, there was 5% test coverage. And 90% of my time was spent writing the framework, the stubs, and like hand growing, mocking out all these singletons and God classes and stuff, which were kind of existed there beforehand. So in that kind of environment, of course, developers are going to say, oh my God, it's going to take me so long to write the tests, because it really is going to take a long time to write tests. There are other types. So when I started off, the first time I came across JUnit, and this is a while ago, then all the unit tests that we had, none of them compiled and none of them ran. So like trying to add to those kinds of tests was also a challenge. This is pre-popularity of continuous integration and that kind of thing. So nowadays, most people are going to be running Jenkins or TeamCity or whatever, running their stuff all the time. So it does make a bit of a difference. But if you join a team which is using a testing framework which you don't understand, or they write tests in a way that you don't understand, that learning slows you down as well. So there's a lot of people who find themselves in these situations, and it is difficult and time-consuming to write tests. There's another thing so I spoke to a bunch of people at DevOps Belgium last year about this topic, because I think my talk was something like, "Are your tests slowing you down?" And some people were sort of saying, something I hear from developers is, especially when you're talking about TDD, because I'm a big fan of TDD, a lot of developers I've spoken to who don't do TDD say, how am I supposed to write the tests first if I don't know what I'm doing, if I don't know what I'm going to produce? And I'm a bit like, how are you supposed to write the code if you don't know what you're going to produce? There's a bit of a mindset shift. If you're kind of used to exploring with the code and figuring out, if I do this, what I do that, then, that people tend to think that that's the thing they're getting paid for. That's the act of coding, to explore with the production code. But if you write your tests first, you're asking all those questions more upfront, or certainly more incrementally. So when I discovered TDD, I loved it because I could ask questions like, what happens if the user does this ridiculous thing that a user will never do? What happens if the input comes out like this? And instead of like having to go around in circles in your brain and try and figure out, oh, where's that code path, or make a note of it. You just write a test for that and put that somewhere else if you're not ready to come to it right now. So what I'm trying to say here is that the very act of coding is thinking, right? It's about problem solving, puzzle solving, what ifs, what do we do here? What's happening over here? What happens if I do that? And we're traditionally taught as developers to kind of think while writing the code, which is a little bit backwards perhaps, because the testing slows us down because we have to think about what we're trying to do. What is it we're really trying to achieve? What should I see when I poke this value here? And so it does feel slow because you're spending a lot of time thinking, but that's the kind of slowness that you need. You need to be thinking slowly. What is it? Think slow and, oh, I can't remember what the thing is. Think slow and time or something. With the thinking is the important bit. So if the thinking happens in the tests, the implementation tends to be a bit faster because you already know what you're trying to do and you know where you're going to do it. But that time has to happen somewhere. It's going to, you're going to pay that cost somewhere.
So the code won't only be faster, it'll also be better.
Right. And so that's what I love about tests first, because when you've written your tests, you've thought about it, but you've also got a list of specifications of when the user does this dumb thing, what happens here? What error do you see? And when something unexpected comes from the API, what do you really expect to see? And when you write the test second, you generally tend to do a bit more of, I implemented the code this way, and I'm just going to check that, it does the thing that I thought it was going to do.
So it documents and all kinds of good things along with it. So you've had a long career already doing all kinds of different applications and different business domains. Did you come to this realization that writing the test would help you think and probably save time in the long run and result in a better quality code base? Or is it something you came into after working on different projects?
So probably for the first 5 years of my career, so I graduated in like 2000 to put things into sort of context. So when I graduated, and I worked at a small startup and I worked at Ford Motor Company. Ford Motor Company was really my sort of traineeship. And we are talking about the software delivery lifecycle with requirements and specifications and a testing team. And this is kind of pre-agile-ish as well, because we're talking 2000, 2001. So back in the early days of my career, we did things the traditional way. And I do remember having a requirements document, writing a tech spec, getting it signed off by people, and then, writing the code and handing it over to the testers. I think probably thinking back though, my first realization about the thing I love about testing, and developers don't normally say things like that, but when I worked at Ford, we had a dedicated test team. I was working on web apps and we had people like poking buttons and making sure that the validation was correct and things worked the way it should. This is a public facing website to users, so it's really important. And actually even internal sites, which replaced mainframe stuff, we still had dedicated testers for that kind of thing. And then I moved to this small startup, and there was only 4 developers in the IT department, and it was a not-for-profit organization. And so I worked very closely with the product owner, and she was the one testing it. So I did this website, and she went, "Oh, it seems kind of fine." And I was like, "Have you checked the validation?" She's like, "Nah." I'm like, "Have you checked what happens if you go forwards and then go back?" This is in servlets, and I was really new to servlets and JSPs. "Have you checked what happens if you go forwards and go back? Have you checked what happens when you refresh the page? What happens if someone comes in halfway through? I did a wizard, halfway through the wizard." And it's I was fairly young, and but I'd experienced this working at Ford. And she's like, "I haven't really thought about that." And I thought, we need a tester. And that's when I was like, testing is so important for developers. That's whatever provides the testing, that's our safety net. And this is the first time I felt fear, because I didn't have a testing team. I was like, this is going live without someone having checked what happens if, and then when you do something stupid, like, all of those what ifs, I always second guess myself anyway. I don't have someone else making sure that I've done the right thing. It's actually up to me to make sure I've done the right thing. And I think some people might go, great, it's like totally in my control. But I went, uh-oh, now I really need to make sure that the stuff I write is high quality. So that was kind of my first experience then later on, I went back to Ford, and that they started using JUnit, and I kind of learned a bit about that, but I didn't see that done well until quite a few years later. But the main time when I really got into TDD and writing, like the way that I'm passionate about testing now is working with Dave Farley at LMAX and doing pair programming and TDD. And I'd read about XP and I read about pair programming and TDD, and it felt like something which was well suited to me, but there are very few places, or certainly back in like 2006-07, there weren't a lot of places doing that kind of thing. And I kind of just knew that there must be a better way than what I was seeing. But then I worked with Dave and people like that who were very experienced, and they showed me this is what TDD looks like. This is how you
Yes.
drive your code by writing your test first. And I'm like, this is what I was missing all along, you know? And
Nice.
So that's a really good segue into my next question for you, Trisha. So you've done a lot of work with IDEs, including writing, like getting a book, getting to know IntelliJ. IDEs have features that I think make it a lot easier to write tests and even to do TDD. Are some of those IDEs better than others? And is it a good way if people have a better IDE to help developers grow their test writing skills?
I do not have an unbiased answer to this. So, I mean, I worked at JetBrains for like 7 years. I've got my JetBrains hoodie because I'm an IntelliJ
Nice.
contributor person. And then this is after I left JetBrains. So my favorite IDE is IntelliJ IDEA. The reason I worked at JetBrains because it was already my favorite. I was already demoing it and stuff, so I was already super biased. So yes, some IDEs are better than others. Some people prefer working in a way which works with whichever. Some people can find an IDE which works the way that works for them. So I mean, my preference is IntelliJ IDEA. That doesn't necessarily mean it's the only one or the best one. When I worked at LMAX with Dave, we were allowed to choose whichever IDE we wanted to work on. And there were people using Eclipse, there were people using IntelliJ IDEA. At that time, I was fairly ambivalent. I'd used both. I realized this is another reason why I ended up doing a lot of stuff with the IDEs. When I worked there, I realized I did not use my IDE. I typed text into a text editor, which happened to be called an IDE. And when I it's a totally different thing, right?
Yes, it is.
And it gives you syntax highlighting, and you can optimize imports, and that's great. You can run your code, that's great. But when I paired with people, and this works, this is for both IntelliJ IDEA and Eclipse. When I paired with people who generate the class, generate a test class, generate test methods, this is specifically TDD as well. Like the thing that I loved about TDD is you write the test the way that you think it should work. So you're like, you know, save new customer, and then you know that the new customer needs a name and an ID and whatever. And if that doesn't compile, your IDE allows you to generate those fields and generate those methods. So you're sort of thinking from the outside in. And I saw it work with both Eclipse and IntelliJ IDEA. And it was, if you're pairing with someone who knows the IDE, that's the key thing. They're like, this is how you create a test in Eclipse. This is how you do it in IntelliJ. This is how you fix problems. For me, IntelliJ was I preferred it. The keyboard shortcuts work better for me. The fact that the refactoring is just so much more seamless. At the time I was working on these two things in about 2008, both IDEs had a lot of feature parity around the things that I was doing. But I personally preferred the IntelliJ way of doing stuff. I preferred the way that the refactoring just kind of did everything under the covers. And, you know, if your tests still run, you know that your refactoring is you have confidence in those kinds of tools. And then I could stop worrying about, find all the errors I've introduced and fix them, and start thinking, what should it look like? How should it work? And let the IDE do all the heavy lifting. So yes, your IDE makes a big difference. It doesn't have to be my favorite IDE, but it has to be one which does the things that you do all the time, that you can rely on, that you have confidence in.
Okay.
Yeah, and my
Time for
experience.
one more question.
Yeah, my experience is it does pay to work with people who already know how to pair with somebody who's good with the IDE and learn how it benefits you. And now we have even more features built into some of the IDEs. IntelliJ has AI Assistant, GitHub has Copilot, and ChatGPT. All those things, I've seen them generate pretty good unit tests for a piece of code. Do you think that this is going to be a help in getting testers test infected and understanding, let's slow down to speed up later and write good code?
Yeah, I really liked it. I was playing around with both Copilot and JetBrains AI Assistant to generate tests for existing code that didn't have tests. One of these things which slows people down. And I really liked it because the first time it generated a test I didn't really like. So I was like, oh, can you make sure that you break this out into individual test methods? And then the next time it generated a test for a different set of code, it kept doing the same things I taught it to do. So it did kind of learn the way that I wanted the test to be. And it does a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of like some boilerplate around sketching stuff out where it doesn't already exist. I mean, my whole caveat around AI is that it doesn't stop you thinking. And in fact, I would suggest it requires you to think more. So type less, use the generation, but think more. Is it doing everything? Has it generated the types of tests I expect? Is there anything missing? Is this behavior really something I want to be testing? Are there edge cases? The edge cases that are the interesting things for me, because ChatGPT can go, yes, no, and you're like, well, what about maybe? So I think it's a really good tool for helping, like I say, bringing developers a bit closer to the testing side, just make things a little bit easier, a bit, take some of the tedious stuff around testing away. Because you can say, like, generate me some, 10 different tests which do the inputs for these kinds of things, which can be quite boring to write if you're doing it by hand.
Yeah, so you still need to have the skills, you still need to learn, but it's going to save you some time so that you can do the more important thinking, it sounds like.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, we're going to wrap it up because this 15 minutes has gone by very quickly.
It
It always
has.
does.
And
So we need to keep it short and sweet.
share
So
my screen again.
all right. So thank you very much, Trish, for being on our talk today. And everybody else, don't forget to contact us, ask us questions. Let us know if you have any topics, or maybe you want to even be a guest on our little chat. We'd love to see you. So
And
subscribe.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, go.
No, well, you were going to say subscribe to our newsletter and all the good things and get in touch with us. But if you want to get in touch with Trisha, we will also put her links into our show notes on YouTube.
Okay. And you can scroll the next slide. So see you next week. And we'll chat with you all then.
Thank you so much, Trisha. This has been, just a peek into your career and how you came to these realizations. It's so exciting to me. So thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.